Today. So good morning, everybody. We've had quite a lot of bookings for this webinar, which is brilliant. So there's obviously a keen interest in the topic. And we'll just give it 1 or 2 minutes just to let people in. We're running slightly late, but we're fine. In terms of questions and comments throughout the webinar, please do post your questions and comments in the chat function. That's the best place at any point, and we'll pick up on those during the Q&A session. So we've got 3 speakers today from 3 brilliant academic institutions who are talking about their work in terms of social enterprise development and connecting with social enterprises. It's kind of those kind of themes today. I think we're really keen on driving this agenda, to be honest. I think there's a lot happening. There's certainly a lot happening. We'll hear obviously more about that today. But I don't think we're probably not coordinating this enough. We're probably not kind of mapping this enough. And maybe that's a role for Social Enterprise Scotland going forward. With our partner organisations, and I can hear a steering group in my head slowly forming. So we might want to bring people together around some kind of steering group going forward. We certainly see this webinar as kind of part of the start of the conversation, really, and yeah, hopefully the start of a really exciting conversation. So I think this is a really interesting topic, and as I said, there's a lot of interest in the webinar today. So without further ado, I think we can just kick off just now. So I will hand over to Dave Gorman at University of Edinburgh.
Thank you, Duncan. Good morning, everybody. A pleasure to join you. I'm looking forward to hearing what the other speakers have to say, to be honest, and what your questions are. But let me do my bit first. So for those who don't know me, which is possibly most of you, I'm Dave Gorman. I'm Director for Social Responsibility and Sustainability at the University of Edinburgh. I am fortunate to have that role, and what my job is overall is to help the university deliver on its commitment to be socially responsible and sustainable, whatever that means in practice. So I work across the university. I'm in what's called professional services, but work with academics as well. And the sorts of things I would do is, we have a climate strategy. So who writes that? That would be myself. We need to be net zero like everybody else. We need to do that across our teaching and our research and our investments. So that's one area. Another thing I would do is look after how we might respond to human rights issues in supply chains, for example, and advising on our investments, and some equality, diversity, and inclusion issues, community relations, and so on. So this is a relatively small part of my role, but a really important one. So what I thought I'd do in my time was just tell you a little bit about the university, which will sound like chest beating, but it's for a reason. So I'll do that quickly, and then just talk about some of the things that we've been doing. So University of Edinburgh, some facts about us: we're a top 20 global university in the only ranking that matters. There's 2 other rankings, but they show us much lower, so they have serious methodological flaws, obviously. We've got 12,000 staff. We've got 44,000 students. We've got an annual turnover of about 1.2 billion. We've got 550 buildings and 10 million square feet of property, or if you prefer a metric, almost 1 million square meters. We've got about £1 billion of assets under management, in other words, investments. So we've got the 3rd largest endowment after Oxford and Cambridge in the UK. We've got 200,000 alumni. We've got students from 190 countries, and we are almost 50% international students, which is quite unusual, really. We spend 350 million a year on goods and services. We undertake 300 million a year of annual research. We spin out 50 companies a year, and are aiming to build an early investment portfolio of about 100 million, and been around since 1583. So that's us. Now, often colleagues will do that because they've got visitors and they want to trot off how large and important we are. But the reason for me doing it is really to say that's quite a substantial organisation. And the reason I do my job is the theory of change is that an organisation of that scale, with that kind of global reach and reputation, should be well placed to make positive change. So the reason I do my job is because I am committed to that. And so I take it quite seriously. How can the university do, with the resources it's got and the reach it's got, how can it divert some of its resources towards positive change? So our overall theory of change for these issues of what we call SRS, social responsibility and sustainability, is try and do some positive change, do it, learn from it, try and do it better, tell everybody else, to try and influence all the other universities in the world and try and scale it over time. So in terms of the investment space, we've had a responsible investment policy for about 20 years because we've got such a large endowment. And I advise on what it means to be a responsible investor, which is always a laugh. You know, there's always some issue that people want us to comment on. I should choose my words more carefully. There are serious issues that people have strong views about in terms of investment that we need to work through. We had started with a divestment discussion about half a decade ago, and we now are fully divested from fossil fuels. But that led us to think about the more positive side. Divestment is a very polarized conversation about selling stocks and being against things. So 3 or 4 years ago, a bit longer actually, we moved about £60 million of our investments into sort of responsible, sustainable tech and renewables. And then we began to say, well, what else could we do? Well, we decided to take some treasury funds and create a social investment fund, which I manage. So we have an investment fund of about £8 million, and we've spent about 6 million of it so far. It was all going terribly well until COVID, and now some of the investments are a little bit under pressure. And we do that fund to try and make a return, but also to try and support companies. So a couple of examples of what we've invested in. One is we were the main funder for the Power Up Scotland programme that some of you may or may not have heard of. So we put £500,000 into that, working with Big Issue Invest and Aberdeen Standard Investments. Sorry, Aberdeen, now with no vowels. Another one we did was we were quite keen to see more social housing in Edinburgh, because Edinburgh's got a real challenge there. So we persuaded Social and Sustainable Capital, if we put £1 million into their investment fund, would they then do a side letter to us and invest? I think I ended up with 3.5 million in Edinburgh. So they've done that. They've supported the Simon Community and Simon Community are building, acquiring properties to support homeless people. So that's the purpose of that fund, and I'm happy to talk about that in more detail. We've then got a team of people who work within our commercial arm who are supporting student enterprise. So there's 5 people working on supporting student enterprise. And the majority of them are actually social enterprises or have a social purpose. So we've got 102 companies that are student enterprises now, and the bulk of them do have a social purpose. And we then try and run programs. So the Social Enterprise Institute courses, we'll run them. We'll try and run competitions. So we'll just run one for climate change. And we'll try and give as much support and build that kind of community of students who are interested. And I don't have time actually to talk, but there's a whole bunch of, I think, rather great companies that have come out of this program. So Advancing Eve is a membership community for supporting women. Chessie Foods is one base that's trying to reuse waste food in Africa. We've got My Algae is a really interesting one, or Social Stories Club, which tries to get, in the corporate gifts world, tries to get social enterprises products into those gifts. So there's a whole bunch of happening on our student social enterprises side. We've been trying to, with probably a bit less success, grow the number of courses and research that we do in this whole area. So I'm again interested to hear from Michael and Ron on that. We do some, but I'd like to do more. We've also got a more dedicated startup fund for general startups, and as I say, that's aiming, it's about 50 million at the minute, and it does seed fund, and it does what they call Series A venture capital stuff. And over time, that has done some social investments, and I would like to see it doing more. We have been supporting Everyone's Edinburgh, for those of you who are aware of that movement of the Can Be movement. And final comment from me, probably overrun already, is the thing that we haven't managed to do very much of, but I'm interested in people's views, is buying social products from social enterprises. One of our challenges has been capacity to support that, but I've just hired someone and I hope they'll be able to help with that. The other challenge we face is, as I said at the start, we're a big university. And so sometimes it's been a case of, well, we'd like to buy your product. We need 10,000. How many can you supply? Well, I can supply 100. Okay. So there's been that kind of challenge of scaling up. But I would like to see us do more eventually. So I guess that's my perspective. Is I have published some work on what we've done in a couple of book chapters and papers, but we're probably been more doing than thinking about the theory of it so far. And my final comment is, over time, I'd like us as a university to think through more clearly how all this activity relates to the overall theory of having a positive social impact. Anyway, hope that was what you're expecting. Hope that was useful. Like I say, I'm really now looking forward to hearing what Michael and Ron have got to say. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate that. So I posted a web link to your department in the chat as well, so everybody can have a look at that. That'd be great. So I'll now hand over to Michael Roy at GCU.
Thanks very much. Duncan, 2 seconds and I'll just get my presentation up. If I can do that now, here we go. So, social enterprise development, the role of universities. I'm from the Unis Centre for Social Business and Health, and this is a bit about me. So I'm a professor of economic sociology and social policy. So I do the kind of theory stuff that was talked about just a second ago. And my specialism is on the health and well-being impacts of social enterprises. So that's what I'm best known for. The Unis Centre for Social Business and Health was set up 11 years ago now, in fact, and is grown to become the world's largest centre for the study of social enterprise in the world, and one of the most important as well. And I'm also associate editor of Journal of Social Entrepreneurship. I'm editor-in-chief of Social Enterprise Journal, which is the main field journal for social enterprise scholarship. I was on the board of EMES, the largest international research network and the longest established international research network. Was set up around about 25 years ago. And I'm also involved in ICERT, which is the International Social Innovation Research Conference, which is this year being held in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and which in fact is where the Social Enterprise World Forum was held last year. So 3 pillars of academia. So we don't just do research, we don't just do teaching, we don't just do engagement. Now, it's very rare to find an academic who does all 3 of these equally, frankly. Usually you find one does more research, less teaching, or perhaps some engagement, but mostly a bit of both. But effectively, I do mostly research, and I do a bit of teaching, and I do a fair bit of engagement as well. But basically, these are the kind of 3 pillars of academia, I feel like. These are the things that universities do. So first of all, research. So developing the social enterprise field of research. So we looked at this started about this around about 11 years ago, and it didn't materialize really for the first couple of years, but really the thinking back to what is it social enterprises are for? You know, as far as we're concerned, they're to address well-being of people, communities, etc. And through a public health lens, we can look to see through addressing factors in the social environment that favour or harm health, things like poverty, lack of education, a roof over someone's house, etc., roof over somebody's head, etc. And effectively, they work to address to help people live long, happy, healthy, fulfilling lives. But how do we know this? How do we know that social enterprises are having an impact like this? And how does it affect individuals, communities, towns, cities, regions, and what the challenges of doing such work well? We had this book out last year, but really it's building on the work that we started in what was the largest research project on social enterprise in the world at that time, Common Health, led by my colleague Cam Donaldson, who I think is on this call actually. And that was ran from 2014 to 18, I think. And it was, we developed a lot of theory on this particular area. Then, but to be honest, it's not just, I lead the social economy group. So we have a range of different projects at any one time. The social enterprise collection, for example, at the top left here, you won't be able to read this unless you go squint to the screen, I've just realized. Then we did some work on strategic public social partnerships, research on that, funded by the Scottish Government. I led some work also funded by the Scottish Government's Chief Scientist Office on mutual aid and the impact of mutual aid through the COVID-19 crisis, for example. And FSE is the bottom right hand, which is the worst acronym known to mankind, but it's it's related to entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship ecosystems. So that was a big project working with 11 countries, and we had over 1,100 people across Europe involved in that particular project. So I'm moving forward from research, and I haven't even scratched the surface of the research we've been doing over the last 11 years or so. But how have we learned how not to teach a course in social enterprise? Now, we are very good at learning how not to teach a course in social enterprise, mainly because we've done it for so long, and we've done several iterations of this. So we had a postgraduate certificate, diploma, and a master's in social enterprise, running over 10 years ago now. Then it changed. We changed tack to have a social business and microfinance MSc. That was capitalizing on the Eunice name, Eunice brand, if you like. And we had a lot of people applying to do this course, but a lot of people who didn't have any money to actually take part in the course, particularly in the Far East, where Eunice is most well known. Then that transformed into an MSc in social innovation that's been running for a few years now. So each of these slightly different audiences, but they've been fairly successful, small but contained, and we do a lot of really good work. We also do stuff at undergraduate level. So we do introductory courses at kind of level 4, so honours year students. It's an elective in global social entrepreneurship and enterprise. And that introduces mainstream business students to the whole idea of social enterprise, many of whom have never heard of the concept before. And that the idea of actually getting to the last year of a business degree without hearing and knowing that social enterprise even existed is horrendous, frankly, but that we introduced the concept, etc. But I mentioned the word critical. Now, we base this upon the idea that we don't just look at social enterprise as being the cure to the world's ills and everything. We look at it as a development, particularly in welfare provision and a new way of delivering public services, etc. There's some work by a colleague Angie Aitken, University of Nebraska, Omaha. She was looking at the missing social and social enterprise education, where people just talk about doing social enterprise without thinking about the context in which it's developed and rolled out across the world. So it's a political phenomenon. We tend to move away from very individualistic or financial tech solutions, etc., just thinking about scaling, etc., and thinking about the sociological, political, historical dimensions of the phenomenon. We emphasize local concerns. We talk about ethics, instructing both the good and the bad, particularly learning from failure is really important. And we obviously we try to embrace diversity, etc. All the things that, and I say that obviously with the emphasis, the fact that I realise I'm on a panel with 4 white men here, but we do try to embrace diversity, etc. Engagement, being an engaged scholar in the Civic University. Civic University is a main plank of the work that we're doing. We're not the University of Edinburgh. We're a mid-ranking university in the world, but we are very rooted within the communities that we serve and very conscious of the fact we are the university for the common good, and all the staff buy into that whole concept, etc. So we do a number of things. Again, this is really just scratching the surface here. We have our John Pierce Memorial Lecture, which happens every year. This is linked to the work of the Social Enterprise Collection Scotland that I mentioned earlier. We host all the papers, etc., from social enterprise leaders, if you like, or thought leaders. And over the years, we've had lots of great speakers, Pauline Gordon, I should say, Laurie Russell, Baroness Thornton, Beatrice Alain from Le Chantier in Quebec, with Ed Mayo, and just recently with Leslie Riddoch. We always, this is, I suppose, what we want to finish on or emphasise, is the fact that the role of academia as a critical friend to policymakers is something we take extremely seriously. So we've always invited politicians and senior policymakers to visit Eunice Centre, and really that's only stopped through COVID. So here's former Communities Minister Angela Constance here meeting Cam and Rachel, who's the director of the centre. So and the last one is basically to say, yeah, and we do the stuff around, encouraging social enterprises who've got business ideas and stuff. That's the work that every university in the world does, in terms of incubation and all that kind of stuff, of particularly social enterprises. So that's really just scratched the surface. If anyone's got any questions for me, I'd be delighted to hear from you, but I'm going to stop sharing now. That's a very whistle-stop tour.
That's great, mate. Thanks, Michael. There's lots for us to digest there, I think, as well. So hopefully some good questions coming up. I'll just hand over to Ron Aitken at Edinburgh Napier just now.
Thanks very much, Duncan. I'll just share my screen now, hopefully, if everybody can see the slides now. So as Duncan, sorry, as Michael and Dave were saying, we're here today to talk about some of the work that the universities do with the social enterprise sector. And like Dave, I'm part of the professional services support at Edinburgh Napier, working with the business school in particular. So that's the focus that I'll have today. I thought I would start just by giving you an overview of some of the activities that we've been doing since lockdown. The business school, if I can give a little bit of background, as Dave did, to Edinburgh Napier, we were created a university in 1992, and we are now the #1 modern university in Scotland, which is something we're very proud of in the Sunday Times rankings. The business school itself has over 9,000 students on campus, and the university has students from around 150 countries that study with us either on campus or through our global online activities. And we've been very much focused on the social enterprise sector over the last few years. Many of you may be familiar with Dr. Wendy Wu and also Dr. Miles Weaver, who are very active. Dave mentioned Everyone's Edinburgh, which is something that Miles has been very much instrumental in helping to bring about through the Cities Can Be programme. And we've also been working with our students over the last couple of years. The students themselves, just before lockdown, ran a conference on campus about making Edinburgh poverty-free, and had a lot of engagement with the local social enterprise sector at that time, looking at the opportunities for business with purpose to really make an impact on some of the social agenda issues. Again, in the comments, somebody was talking about interface, and we've worked with Interface recently to run a session on balancing purpose with profit. So building in the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN into business plans, and being able to align your business with the ability to measure and track impact against those SDGs. Dr. Andrew Bratton as well in the business school recently published a paper on leading environmental change. And that was looking at some of the leadership issues and particular challenges around the many aspects of environmental change that are impacting on all organizations at this time, but obviously which many social enterprises are particularly focused on trying to address at the moment. And really what I'd like to focus a few minutes on is the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years with the Impact Investment Forum at the Business School, which has involved Social Enterprise Scotland and Social Investment Scotland, some of the key philanthropy and venture capital organisations in Scotland, and many of the social enterprise sectors, so including organisations like Cyrenians, to look at some of the challenges that the social enterprise sector is facing, and to look at some of the practical changes that might support them in that. So I'll talk a little bit over the next couple of minutes on a particular campaign that we've developed to look at opportunities with forestry grants for the social enterprise sector. But my colleague, Dr. Wendy Wu, as I mentioned earlier, is actively engaged in a research project with the Social Enterprise Scotland, where we're looking for panel members. So that as well might be something that would be of interest to people this morning. The social impact or the Impact Investment Forum involved a wide number of partners. And as I say, I was involved in helping convene the working group that was looking at forestry as an income stream, as a potential income stream for social enterprises, working with many partners, as you can see here. And we submitted last year a paper to the Scottish Government calling on some changes that had the support of industry to make this a much easier task for the social enterprise sector. The key elements of this are that really there is an existing framework for government support for grants in forestry for cash, carbon and community, so that social enterprises would be able to access funding for planting of commercial timber or timber for carbon sequestration, and indeed for local biodiversity or reforestation, which is becoming increasingly a key motivator for the sector. There's community access as a requirement to grant funded woodlands, which is something that any application through Scottish Forestry would have to consider, but that sits very well obviously with many social enterprises as key partners in their local communities. And we're looking at schemes that support particular priority areas, so targets for urban reforestation and in the Central Scotland Green Zone, as well as work across rural Scotland. And one of the opportunities here is that new woodland can be planted to offset your own operations or to attract sponsorship from third parties. So the key thing here is that the last couple of years, as you'll all be only too familiar, have presented a real challenge for the social enterprise sector with diminished cash reserves because of the pandemic. This comes at an unfortunate time where the Scottish Government is actually wanting us to focus on net zero emissions with an expectation that by 2030, the government will ask for 50,000 commercial buildings across Scotland to implement remedial work to make their buildings more energy efficient. And this will include small offices, community halls and shared space venues that many social enterprises own or help operate. And within the current parliamentary timeline, Social Enterprise Scotland members are also under pressure to introduce these retrofit measures and to find ways to offset their remaining carbon emissions as they operate. So the proposal that we presented to the Scottish Government last year with our industry partners looked at the existing grant structure and ways that would be available for social enterprises to access new revenue streams using this opportunity. As a background to this, just to give you a little bit of context, the Scottish Government has already made a public commitment to plant 15,000 hectares of new woodland each year up to 2025. They're looking for those woodlands to address a number of different opportunities and concerns, including productive timber, commercial timber stocks, but not limited to that. They're also looking at carbon sequestration and, as I said, local biodiversity, particularly in urban areas, as a key opportunity for new woodlands. And that means that there's a key opportunity in central Scotland in particular, but also urban areas across the country. And the partnership that we brought together through this particular programme can provide a lot of support and direction and information to anyone who's interested in getting involved in any of these opportunities. We want to encourage any organisations that do own small plots of land to consider planting new woodland. And the mechanism for getting that approved through carbon sponsorship is already in place with the Woodland Carbon Code, so we could support you with that. The key thing here is that where many people may feel that this has just not been something that is available to them through scale, the Woodland Carbon Code actually allows for aggregated land submissions. And what that means is that we can bring together partners through Social Enterprise Scotland to do combined bids. So anything from 1/10 of a hectare or about the size of a tennis court would be eligible to participate in one of these schemes with the right partners. A couple of things briefly just to flag is that the partners do not need to be in geographical proximity. You can be in different parts of the country and aggregate your bid successfully. So you can introduce like-minded members through Social Enterprise Scotland to create one of these aggregated submissions. And a key thing obviously is to reassure people that they would never then lose ownership of their own land, even if that aggregated bid is then sponsored by a third party. So I can answer some questions on that or some of the other aspects, either in the Q&A or as a follow-up to this meeting. But there's a number of grants, as I say, through Scottish Forestry for all potential applications. Woodland Trust Scotland and Future Woodland Scotland will support applications for native tree planting, which is particularly relevant, obviously, for the local biodiversity and reforestation. And we've also got partners, as I mentioned, such as the Clyde Climate Forest in the west, and the Riverwoods project, which is run by the Wildlife Trust in Scotland, which can create opportunities for you to link up with partners in a wide number of areas across the country. So that's quite a specific opportunity, but as I say, there's through the business school, there are a number of other opportunities. And one thing that I'm sure Michael and Dave would also flag at the moment is that do be aware of the upskilling opportunities that are available with funding through Scottish Funding Council. There's an opportunity with the universities across Scotland for people to upskill and take their employees through training with full professional qualifications in some instances through that upskilling agenda. So that's something else I'm sure we could talk about. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thanks, Ron. I think it's fair to say there's a lot to digest there from the various presentations. There's a lot of activity happening, which is fantastic. So there's a few comments in the chat, which I'll come to first. There was talk about Interface, the organisation, so we posted the web link in there about Interface. Interface is the organisation that brings together private sector businesses and some third sector organisations with academic institutions. So it's certainly worth attendees having a look at that organisation. Yeah, there was a question from David Reed, which talks about social enterprise versus the SME model in a way, kind of how you explain that to people, what the understanding is. And I suppose that feeds into the question about general awareness raising of social enterprise. I mean, I suppose I'll come to you, Michael, first. I mean, you can kind of give it maybe a bit of the history around this, but how has that changed over time in terms of the awareness, both among students and among staff in institutions as well? How's that changed?
I think awareness has increased over the years. I think as soon as you point out the fact that people see social enterprises every single day, you know, whenever they see someone selling a big issue, for example, is a form of social enterprise, you know, or you could argue John Lewis, or, you know, John Lewis isn't a good example, but you know what I mean? It's just a different way of doing business, some of which are small, most of which are small, some of which are medium, some of which are large, you know, so it's just another kind of SME definition, but yeah, I think it has changed over the years. The awareness has increased, but it's been slowly and surely. I don't think it's still within the forefront of people's minds when you start talking about businesses. People often ask you for an explanation of what it is you mean, and it's not straightforward. The more people ask you what a social enterprise is, you ask 100 people and you get 100 different answers. So.
Fair point. Dave, Ron, do you have any particular thoughts on that kind of awareness raising and just kind of what the current level of knowledge is within your respective institutions?
I think, sorry, on you go, Dave.
No, I was going to say after you, Ron.
I was just going to say, I think the work in particular that Miles Weaver and Hock Tan are doing at the business school with the social enterprise sector is very much focused around putting purpose at the heart of your business plans and working with organizations who may already classify themselves as social enterprises, or who may be set up in a structure that supports that through, one of the legal formats that would support that. But also working with a lot of organizations, particularly in the SME sector, who now want to embrace the ethos of purpose before profit, and to have that, whether it's driven by the Sustainable Development Goals and putting that at the heart of their plans, whether it's to do with the circular economy and the way that they manage their life cycle throughout the business process, but they're reevaluating what it is that they get up in the morning to do and how that will drive the business in every aspect of the way that it operates. So I think that's partly where a lot of the debate at the moment is focused, is around, you may have somebody who's set up from day one as a social enterprise, and Dave was talking, we have a similar scheme at Edinburgh Napier with Bright Red Triangle for startups and business support for students. And they might have that in mind from day one, but there's equally a lot of activity and a lot of support and focus on helping the entire business community, but especially the SME sector to sort of look at purpose in a new light.
So my view, and you picked up on, I'm no expert in these matters, and learned a lot just listening to Michael and Ron. It's kind of all these areas for me, it's kind of like the best of times and the worst of times. So, somebody was asking me, I'm giving a talk next week about COP26, and I was there with my special pass in the blue zone, trying to do my bit. And somebody was saying, how did that conference go? And it's like, well, it depends on your perspective. Interest in and action on climate change has never been higher across the globe, and things are happening now that are, happening faster than I would have ever expected them, even 3 years ago. At the same time, the world's response to climate change is disastrously slow. We are nothing like where we need to be. It is urgent. The planet is on fire. You probably saw the articles of the weekend that the Arctic and Antarctic are 40 to 50 degrees warmer than they should be at this time of year. And I feel it's the same in this area. If I look at the interest and the embedding of these issues in our business school or in our commercial approach or the number of social enterprises and so on, never been higher. If I look at the sort of range of social issues and indicators that we're facing in the UK and the world, going in the wrong direction, heading back towards the kind of Gilded Age levels of inequality. So I feel like that about this topic, depending on the time of day and what mood I'm in, it's almost like great progress versus structural inequality and indicators going in the wrong direction. I think on balance, I'm positive, but even when I take something that is a business wanting to do good, because of the work I do, it's often an overview of lots of things. We were supporting a business a couple of years ago who's making a great product. And I was saying to them, okay, so you've outsourced the product to China. Have you thought about human rights issues? Are you buying from products made by the Uyghurs in concentration camps in Western China? I don't know, I've never thought of that. And that's one of the challenges for me. You can always find an issue where you think we could do more. We tend to use the SDGs as a lens. And so you can always find something, can't you, as well? Even when people are trying to do the right thing, quite what the right thing is in this complex world is difficult. But on balance, I am positive, but I just feel probably like the speakers, we could do more, we could do faster, we could do better.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's trying to make that, I don't use the phrase paradigm shift because I think it's used all the time, but we need to make that big shift. I think it's how do we do that? And we've always got that challenge within the social enterprise community is how do we make social enterprise a business model of choice? How do we mainstream social enterprise and make sure that social and environmental purpose is really, really the heart of every business? And that's kind of our ongoing challenge. Just in terms of that question about big resources, we talked about that in some of the presentations about universities do have these huge resources. You might not feel that way sometimes on a day-to-day basis, I'm sure, but universities are big institutions. Some people even say they're social enterprises, you might argue. But how do we kind of unlock more of that? Obviously, there's lots of work happening. You guys have talked about the big, rich diversity of activities, but how do we kind of unlock a bit more of that and that resource to really drive social enterprise?
I can have the first go and then people with a better answer. So one of the things I'm always trying to do in my job is innovate using our reputation and scale. So one of the things I liked about the Power Up Scotland programme is that the first lost capital was taken by the Scottish government, as it should, I would argue, because it's, instead of giving out grants, it could repurpose that grant as investment funds. And then I can then triple their money because I can say, well, I can't take those sort of risks because I'm using treasury funds, but I can come in behind that if there's some protection. So I think we could just generally think about innovating to to do more and better, because there's no shortage of capital in the world. You know, I know it doesn't feel like that if you're running social enterprise and stuff, but the world is awash with capital trying to find homes for safe returns, but you just can't quite link it up. So I think that's one aspect, and the other aspect is gone out of my head actually. So I'll maybe let somebody more informed. Oh, sorry, yeah, the other one that I want to make is about diversity. I think that point came up earlier. We generally have a rule in the events I run now that we won't have all male panels, and then we'll mix it up in terms of diversity. We are trying hard. We're hoping to invest in a big issue fund to actively target underrepresented communities, so minority ethnic communities, disabled communities, because when we looked at our commercialization stuff, all the people who were getting invested in looked like me, and all the people who were judging where to invest looked like me. And so I do think in terms of where we could go next and better, that whole area of targeting communities that don't normally get involved in this stuff is something very much on our mind and my boss's mind as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I posted in the chat actually about diversity and social enterprise. We'll be doing a webinar on that probably in May kind of time, actually, just looking at how we can change that. We have really good stats in terms of women's leadership of social enterprise, but there's obviously far more we can do in that area as well. So does anybody else want to come back on that point about kind of unlocking resources and kind of resources?
Sure. I mean, I think these resources, you can affect change at 3 different levels, if you like. There's a very local way. So thinking about we've got look at universities as an anchor institution. For example, the community wealth building agenda, thinking about the position of a university as a buyer of stuff. I don't believe for 1 second that a university can't diversify from whom it buys from, and should be thinking about social enterprises as far as these things go. In terms of the resources, I go back to this thinking about the capital, the intellectual capital within universities, and the way that we can effect change and we can influence, as I said, being a critical friend to policymakers, helping them avoid unintended consequences and disastrous policy decisions, like we've seen recently. And then at a kind of macro level, I think thinking about challenging the neoliberal paradigm, and thinking about social enterprise as a mechanism, to challenge as an alternative actor to challenge the mainstream narratives about the way we do business. So yeah, absolutely. I think that the universities can do this, but at different levels. So it's about leveraging resources and the resources that exist to do different things, and social enterprise is a great vehicle for doing that.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point as well about changing the narrative. It's a lot about storytelling in social enterprise. It's like, how do we change that narrative around specifically the economy and what type of economy we want to actually build? Ron, do you have any particular thoughts on that kind of resources of universities question, or any other points raised?
I think just one very kind of practical resource that the universities offer, which would be of real value to the social enterprise sector, is the way that we structure placements within degree programs, both at undergraduate and postgraduate level, and as an opportunity to access talent and resource that would otherwise potentially not be available to the social enterprise sector. Contacting university placement teams and looking at ways that you can present a project that will benefit your organization, but also provide a work-based learning opportunity for a student is a very effective resource to be aware of and to use when the time is appropriate.
There's quite a lot of comments and questions coming now, which is brilliant. So I'm just going through the chat at the moment. There's a question here about intellectual property. So looking at social enterprise as a viable spin-out option for research, what panel views are on the use of IP and exploring startup investment using social enterprise. So it's a bit of a convoluted way that I read it out there, but if anyone's got any particular views on startup social enterprise and spin-outs and IP.
IP is a very complicated issue, and I, generally speaking, social enterprise operate in an open innovation kind of perspective, so IP issues don't really come into it. That said, I definitely think you should check out and speak to an expert. Lorna Paul at our place, for example, Professor Lorna Paul, she spun out a social enterprise from the university for her and her work. She works on, her is giraffe healthcare. So I would definitely encourage you to go and have a word with her. She's had issues with the IP, but they turned out not to be such big issues. But I definitely think you need to speak to an expert if you're going down the line of IP in universities. I used to do this work in the Scottish government, and it's a very contentious area.
Anybody else got thoughts on that? Dave?
Yeah, to me, IP is a bit like VAT. It doesn't matter how many times I'm briefed on it, I'll never understand it properly. But the more serious point is that, so we take our IP very seriously. We've just spun out another company that's generated some tens of millions of pounds for us. And there is that, one of the things I try and do over time is embed these issues within the university model. And to give another example, we have a model of, if you're an early stage researcher at a university, in the past, you had to fly to get to places so you can engage with people, so you could be seen at conferences, so you could meet the criteria to be promoted. How is that consistent with a low carbon world, for example? And that's something I've been trying to get our universities to wrestle with. I can do my bit in terms of the direct emissions, but these kind of more fundamental questions are difficult. And I think this is the same one with IP. So we would argue at the minute, the model we probably have is largely we'll keep and protect the IP. We don't have shareholders, so when we make money on it, we reinvest. And we do the same with our own catering and accommodation. When we make a profit on those things, we reinvest them in the student things. So that's our model. But you can challenge that model and say, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing something else. And that would be a really interesting one for, should more of university IP just be given away? But then again, I am aware that when that's happened in the past, Mariana Mazzucato and others make these points, don't they? Some of this wonderful innovation that we claim from Apple and others is really fundamentally based upon publicly funded research. I used to see this in one of my previous roles with SEPA, that we gave away maps for free, and then people started charging for the layer they put on top, which is a very straightforward layer. So, as Michael says, I think it's a really fascinating one. And if my understanding is, if you let universities decide it on their own, we probably default to protecting the IP on the whole. Good question, question mark.
Ron, do you have any particular thoughts on that point?
I think it's primarily, very individual to the ideas or the opportunities that are coming forward. It is something that within, if it's a question coming from somebody within universities, each university will have a team that would advise the staff on any potential spin out or IP issues. And if it's external and somebody's kind of more concerned about sharing their IP with the university, then you could go through different knowledge exchange frameworks and processes whereby that asset is protected in any discussions and any way that the university might help to evolve the idea. But it's much, very much driven by individual circumstances.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to combine a few questions here because there's a lot coming in. In terms of community wealth building, obviously, Michael, you mentioned community wealth building as a kind of, if people don't know, it's a community-led regeneration process, a kind of practical approach to that kind of way of doing things. And also that point of procurement as well, which kind of fits into that. Any particular thoughts on community wealth building and procurement? Either or?
I think community wealth building is obviously something which is touched on. Dave and I mentioned Everyone's Edinburgh, which has come about through the Cities Can Be programme, and is looking at ways that universities, the commercial sector and communities can address issues from the community level up and find solutions to challenges and problems. So there's a number of different frameworks that are already there that can certainly support activity at that level, which I think there's a lot of very good case studies across Scotland now, where the Clyde Climate Forest that I mentioned in my presentation is another example of a community-led initiative there. The kind of broader question around procurement, I think, again, all universities would be reviewing their policies on this at the moment, and would be positively minded to actively engage with new suppliers that have a social enterprise focus. So I certainly would encourage anyone with that kind of business model to approach universities and to try and open up that dialogue.
Yeah.
I would like to say so. Yeah, I've been busy trying to educate myself on community world building over the last couple of years and looking at the American examples and Preston and so on. And I'm less familiar with what's going on in Scotland, except Ayrshire. But I just hired someone recently called Head of Social Impact, and they've looked through their job description. There's a line somewhere saying, help us figure out what we should be doing on community wealth building. We've touched on bits of it. I would argue this 8 million fund that we've got is attempting to diversify ownership a bit. We were about to open up some of our estate at night. Got all these buildings that are closed at night, and we were just about to open up to community groups when COVID struck. So I hope we'll be doing that soon. We've signed up to be a living wage employer, and trying to now support the city with a living wage campaign. Procurement's a really interesting one, but generally, I think the reason I'm doing this job, because I think universities have many advantages that others don't. We have all this knowledge. We have all these brilliant young people, not always young, but people who want to learn and want to then put it into practice. We have scale. We're not going anywhere. At University of Edinburgh is not planning to relocate to China anytime soon. And we don't have quarterly returns, but we're in a field that has been growing traditionally. I know it's been tough over the last few years for universities, but we have the ability to innovate and take long-term views that many others don't. And I think community wealth building is a really interesting idea that we could develop further, but I'm at the earliest stages. I popped in the chat earlier. I'm very happy to receive challenge back about what the university that we are in could be doing more on. I just feel that, take Edinburgh University in particular, we have so much opportunity. It's a privilege to be in the university. I want to take some of that and help others who don't have those opportunities. What can we do to support anti-poverty in the city, for example? So anyway, I'm keen on the whole thing, but we're at the earliest stages of trying to figure out what that means for us.
Yeah. Michael, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, really, although this agenda is kind of hot right now, I think a university like Glasgow Caledonian has been taking that very seriously for the last 20, 30 years, really. I mean, in terms of thinking about the work that we do locally, don't get me wrong, I think we could certainly do more, particularly from the procurement perspective. I definitely think we could be buying social, buying local, as far as we could always do more. But I definitely think that thinking about the role we have as I mentioned before, as a civic university, as an anchor institution in the city, and indeed the very particular position in the city, and thinking about our demographic and what we do as a powerful vehicle for social mobility. I think a university like Glasgow Caledonia, it's not a difficult case to make in terms of the social impact that we have, and we're certainly not perpetuating inequalities. We're not exclusionary or anything to the extent that other universities perhaps are. But at the same time, we can always do more, and I think it's a constant challenge for us. Yeah.
And I probably big up our corporate challenge at this point as well. So any organisations that are not involved in our corporate challenge trying to get social enterprise and supply chains, so please do check that out. We can obviously provide information about that as well. Just to get to this point about, I suppose, young people and students and their views and feelings about social impact and environmental impact going forward, and also their involvement in social enterprise. What is the kind of situation in your respective institutions around that? So we engaged recently, for example, with Stirling University and their career service, and just talked to the students about social enterprise as a career option. And there was a particular question around social enterprise business models as well. Are they kind of a bit too complicated for people, for young people to kind of engage with? Is there a better way we could model social enterprise, that kind of thing? Just kind of that general careers in social enterprise question.
I'm happy to go first. We're certainly seeing huge interest from our students. I think I mentioned we've got 103, I think, student enterprises, of which at least half are social or social purpose in some way. We have been having debates about, as you figured out, I'll never be a diplomat, and this is a small part of my job in a way, so I can't master all the details the way others can. So, but I've been told, you know, well, you don't understand asset locks and so on. Well, maybe not, but I don't want to put unnecessary barriers in the way of people who want to do social good. So we've been trying to. I am suspicious of anybody my age who says, "Isn't it great that the younger people are coming through and they'll sort it all out for us?" I think that's an abdication of responsibility. What I'm very interested in now is equipping young people at the university with the solutions to let them get on with things. I've spent most of my career trying to tell people climate change is a problem. Obviously not done very well because we haven't actually tackled the issue. But what we see is instead of young people coming through unaware that's a problem, they're coming with solutions. They're coming with ideas I never would have thought of. And my whole role is partly to get as much as I can to support those young people to just, you know, get out of the way and let them come up with solutions now. So I am, yeah, I say suspicious if we say, oh, isn't it great, we'll just leave it to young people. No, but we can certainly support them. And the demand for social enterprise support teaching in this space has never been higher at our university.
Anyone else got particular thoughts on that?
I think the interest at student level is at an all-time high, just as Dave's saying, in terms of opportunities within the social enterprise sector or startups with that specific focus in mind. And the universities do, both within course content material and with the support that's provided through startups such as Bright Red Triangle at Edinburgh Napier, will actively advise and encourage people on appropriate business models that they can follow for that. But again, it's one of those ones where, depending on what the idea is, different models will be appropriate. And I guess that's part of what you're saying in terms of the complexity of what is the social enterprise business model. There isn't just one, organisations such as Social Enterprise Scotland do a phenomenal job as well at helping advise before people do set up. So yeah, I would encourage people to make approaches to either their local university or yourselves and kind of get some access to support that they can in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both of those points. Goes back to something that Dave actually said earlier around you're right, it is at an all-time high interest in social enterprise as a mechanism for trying to address social issues, but I can't decide whether that's a good thing or not, frankly, because the problems are so acute. As was mentioned earlier, inequality is at an all-time high. It's like when Dickens was writing about Great Expectations. We get inequalities at those levels that at present, we see civil unrest, we see massive inequalities, etc., climate crisis and so on and so forth, and so asking our millennials effectively to come up with solutions to these problems is problematic in my estimation. That said, I think they should definitely be encouraged because my and the earlier generations made such a hash of it, so perhaps we should pass the baton on to people who are actually going to make a change. But yeah, I always look at Scandinavia and think, why are there not more social enterprises in Scandinavia? Surely they need more and more social enterprises. Of course they don't. The reason why they don't is because they don't have the same levels of inequality as we do here. There's so fewer social problems, etc. That why do they need so many social enterprises? So we need to have a think about the ramifications, the political ramifications, and etc. of what we're encouraging here, and to make sure that we're encouraging active citizenship, but citizenship that's not just about coming up with a market-based solution to a social problem, but thinking of connecting that to political activism, for example, and to really interrogating, what we're being told in terms of the mainstream narrative that you mentioned earlier, Duncan, around what is business as usual and so on and so forth. Sorry, I'm in my soapbox now. I could rant for the rest of the day.
That's fine. It's all good. All good.
I'm just going to shut up now, and you get the idea. If anyone wants to continue the rant with me over a coffee run, please send me an email.
Well, that was my next question actually. So I guess if any attendees want to get in touch with you guys, if that's okay for me to pass on your details, I assume that's okay. Just probably put you on the spot there if it's not. But so we're just at 12:30. I just have the 12:30, so we're just going to wind up just now. But I think that's a really, really good mix of activities. I would say it's a very, very diverse mix of social enterprise activities within universities, and it's really impressive, I think. And hopefully we're going to see a lot more of this. I did mention a steering group, so that's maybe on the horizon. We may talk about a steering group, about bringing together you guys with other institutions as well, just to talk about how we develop social enterprise better, and just being able to share and promote what you're doing as well. I think that's really important as well. Just a reminder as well, please send through any news you've got, any new projects around this kind of agenda to us, and we'll happily promote that for you as well. We probably didn't get to all the questions. Actually, I tried to combine a few, but we didn't get to every single question. So I will try and put these together in one place. And if somebody wants to attempt to answer them, or I can answer them, then we'll do so. But thank you very much to our speakers today and everybody for coming along. It's been a really, really interesting and really, really important discussion, I think, to be honest. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.